Hey, everybody. How's it going? And lighting in here is hilarious. I thought that I'd go live because I haven't really been too active on Substack lately, and I wanted to let everybody know what's going on. So maybe I'll wait just a couple seconds until there's a couple of people. Hi, everybody. Emily, Christina, Angeloon, and Lynn. Hi, hi, hi. So I am in a secret location. It's not that secret. Um, I've been told that this is where the Montreal Canadiens stay when they're trying out for the team. Got into a pretty cool hotel, doing a pretty cool event in Montreal tomorrow morning. And I thought because I haven't been around much on Substack lately, I would do a live. This is going to be very long. Wanted to give an update on what's going on. And please use the chat if you have any questions. I submitted my sixth manuscript last night. Yes, the manuscript for the number 3 volume in Canada in Decline, and this book is on democracy. So here's where you're going to want to ask your questions if you have any. The first book was on the social safety net, which was a broad look at the services that exist in Canada, why they exist, how they maintain white Christian supremacy within Canada, but also built an economy that worked more or less all right for everybody, for most people. And the second book was on the corporate control of Canada. And so why does it feel like none of our decisions matter? Why does it feel like we can't get anything done? Oh, it's because everything's controlled by corporations. So this next book is on democracy. And it's you're not supposed to say this when you're a writer because you want people to buy your book, but it's definitely the most depressing book I've ever written. If you're watching, let me know. Do you think Canada lives in a democracy? What do you think? Do we live in a democracy? I mean, you can answer that in a whole bunch of different ways. And the way that I wanted to answer that was, do the citizens have the ability to influence their politicians? And because the series is called Canada in Decline, has our access declined to our politicians? Thank you, Revolution Party of Canada. You would obviously say no. No, we don't really have democracy in Canada. We have a system of representative democracy that has over the years gotten so much more restrictive that we now have a system that is the least democratic across liberal democracies in the world. So, I was at someone's house recently and I was telling them about this book and they asked me, well, is it better than the United States? The truth is, if we had a Donald Trump in Canada, which, Pierre Poilievre is not Donald Trump. The guy has zero, he can't crack a joke, right? Like, let's give Trump credit where credit is due. He can tell a good joke. If we had a Donald Trump in Canada, what he could do with the amount of power in the prime minister's office would be devastating. And actually, we are witnessing this with Prime Minister Mark Carney. So the democratic system is supposed to have 3 branches of government, the judicial branch, which is pretty obvious, judges. And then you have the legislative branch and the executive. And in Canada, the executive is appointed by the prime minister, serves at the pleasure of the prime minister. The prime minister can get them out with the cabinet shuffle. They can reward backbench MPs with cabinet positions. He literally gives them mandate letters, and they cannot really hold his power to account. In fact, they're in cabinet because they support him, right? Then you look at the House of Commons. Where is the opposition supposed to intervene? Well, in a majority government, there's very few opportunities to intervene, maybe at the committee level. But of course, when you've got liberals acting as red Tories, it means that the Tories are actually off the deep end crazy. And what is on kind of the rest of the political spectrum in Canada, the Greens, the NDP, and the Bloc, they're disorganized. If you are in government, you should be able to challenge your leader, which we all know is not very possible. Usually, if you challenge your leader, you're booted out of caucus, or like we just saw with Stephen Guilbeault, you just quit. Now, I'm going to pause because there's some comments. So if Ford Nation is any indication, you know what, Dave? My last chapter in this book was supposed to just be on general attacks against a democracy that weren't necessarily coming from the federal government. And I could not spend most of the time in that chapter Doug Ford. So I'm going to keep talking about Prime Minister Carney, and then I'm going to get back to Doug Ford because I think that Ford is the future of where Canada is heading, and it is very, very, very scary. Of course, so is Carney. So with this structure, we have fake majorities because the majority of people did not vote in favor of the Liberal Party. We all know that. Not even with the manufactured majority government. I mean, the Conservatives had, I forget if they had higher popular vote, but I mean, they were neck and neck with the Liberals, and Liberals won out. They form a minority government. They entice people to join their party. And so then they form this majority government that is effectively supported by a quarter of Canadians. If you include people who don't vote, which we have to include people who don't vote, a quarter of Canadians electing a prime minister who has almost complete power concentrated in his office with very few checks and balances within the House of Commons. That leaves us with the judiciary. And what are politicians using to avoid the checks and balances of the judiciary? Section 33, the notwithstanding clause, the get out of jail free card for sections 2 and 7 to 15 within the charter. So Revolutionary Party of Canada, the infrastructure for Canadian Trump is being built before our eyes. Yeah. I mean, and this is the scary thing, right? Because Carney is very popular. The popularity is going to evaporate. It won't evaporate tomorrow. It'll take a couple of years, but when it evaporates, the question will be who will be there ready to grab Canadians' votes. And maybe the NDP will build itself up to a place where it can grab Canadians at that point. Jury's out on that. I wouldn't put money on that. But it's going to be the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are going to find a more vicious and actually charismatic leader, and we will be in bigger trouble than we are now. Now, I don't want to get too into the hypothetical because actually the trouble we're in right now is pretty serious. Mark Carney wants to pull 150 to $200 billion out of the civil service by cutting it by 15%. We all remember that. He wants to hire 300,000 reservists to be in the military. That would give a military, like if we compare Canada to the United States, it's about 10 times difference in size, right? The Americans' entire military apparatus is 2.8 million people. And so that would make us have what? A bigger army, reserve army than the United States? Does he think we're stupid? Like, is he going to invent them? Is he going to just wave a magic wand? Like, how is that going to happen? He's been boasting that he spent $62 billion already on the military. $62 billion is almost what we spend on primary and secondary education total in Canada. Almost. It's like in the $74 billion or so. Like, this is a crisis. This is a disaster. And he is setting Canada up to completely, I mean, feed the empire, whatever empire it is these days, with Canadian bodies to service wars that, one, we've never democratically actually agreed to, two, that are morally objectionable, and three, that are being led by psychomaniacs. Like, it's hard to talk about this stuff without sounding like you're nuts because, you're not allowed to make these comments on like the CBC or whatever. I'm doing this in a hotel room by myself, right? But it's true. It's literally where we're at right now. And I'm looking at the comments. Yeah. So Doug Ford, should I talk to Doug Ford right now? Yeah, I mean, representative democracy is vulnerable to corruption. I mean, all democracies are vulnerable to corruption, but you need to have those checks and balances. And the representative part of representative democracy removes a lot of those checks and balances because we don't have a direct line in to government. And yeah, the war bank. The funny thing about the war bank was I just checked out the war bank, like the funders, like just naively thinking that this was like an international project. Every single one of Canada's banks are among like the 13 funders. Like almost majority are Canadian banks. This is a Mark Carney conceived ridiculous scheme. And uh oh my God. Agriculture Canada staff been given a choice to retire or join the military. Isn't that a choice? Is that a choice? That seems like that's not very much of a choice. So I've been tracking these cuts. I'm sure you've seen it on my Substack if you're curious. A lot of the public sector unions are tracking the cuts that are related to their own workers as well. One of the things that I'm like, now that my book is finished, like, I mean, this has been like all I've been doing for the last 6 weeks. I'm hoping to be able to start doing interviews with people that are directly affected by these cuts that can actually explain them to people. Like, what does it mean that they're cutting experimental farms? What does it mean that they're cutting food inspection? What does it mean they're cutting weather radar? Like, I use weather radar all the time to know if I should have a picnic or not, or to know if I'm going to get caught in a storm in a soccer game. Like, you're cutting The weather radar? Are you kidding me? That one I'm really mad about. Okay, let's talk about Doug Ford. So I had not been paying super, super, super close to Ontario because I live in Quebec and, whatever. Like when you leave Ontario, it's like you kind of want it to just, good luck, folks. I was on a panel in February, part of OPIRG Guelph's conference on, radicalizing the grassroots. It was really, really fun. And I spoke with Mike Schreiner. And Mike Schreiner I think he's a great guy. I really like Mike and I think that he does good work. And he was the first person that I heard describe what Doug Ford is doing as fascism. And I think that that is a fair thing to describe what Doug Ford is doing. So, who is it? Dave, I think, mentioned the strong mayor powers. This is really, really crazy. So we have Ford. He has shrunk the size of certain city councilors, like as we know in Toronto, and has created this thing called strong mayor's power, which is extending to all mayors in the province. And a strong mayor will be able to act as if he has more power than an average city councilor, right? So currently, a mayor is just another vote at city council. Strong mayors have more power and can actually pass decisions with just a third of the council, who they can name as an executive. And so, what that means, I mean, Mike Morris is great too. Super agree. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Mike Morris too. Um, so they in a city council like Brampton City Council, where there's only six councilors, which is nuts. Decisions can actually pass by two votes, and if the decisions that the mayor wants to push through are in line with the provincial government, they're allowed to push through those decisions. This is a disaster, and it's not as if municipal councils have all accepted this. Stratford's municipal council is challenging this right now, for example. And I think it does have to be challenged legally, but I think that the legal challenges they're not going to be a waste of time, but they're going to be hollow victories because by the time it actually goes through the courts, it'll be another era. But like if we allow this strong mayors thing to take root across the province, basically we are destroying 200 years of democracy in the province of Ontario. In addition to strong mayors, Ford is also appointing regional representatives. And so there's regional councils all over the province. Before 2016, the regional councils would elect a chair from among elected regional councillors. So again, a kind of representative democracy. The Liberals came in and they said that they didn't like the backdoor dealings. They didn't really like how these councils were running. The chair was going to be elected. And so the chair position was actually put out in the general election at the same time as municipal councils and the mayor, which, I think makes a lot of sense, right? Doug Ford, of course, like, this is dysfunctional. I'm an idiot. And he has been appointing regional chairs, notably in Niagara, where there was a vacancy. He didn't allow for a by-election to happen. He pushed through this vote, pushed through a regional chair. The guy was a former cop, comes from a family with oil money, and the anti-racism coalition in Niagara manages to find out that the guy's got a literal signed copy of Mein Kampf by Hitler, signed by Hitler. Like crazy. And he's like, well, I just have this for historical whatever. I have other documents too. And it's like, is there a more evil thing to have in your house? Something that literally Hitler himself signed? That's a good example of how museums can keep that stuff under glass. It's like, we don't need to have that stuff in our homes. It's embarrassing. He resigns. Um, the other the other strong mayor that Ford appointed is in York region, and he's also a former cop. And so now we have these regional councillors who Ford is talking about giving strong mayor powers to, who aren't elected at all, appointed by the provincial government with the authority as if they've been elected by the general population. It's kind of scary, actually. Like, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that this is scary. The guy in Niagara, he was talking about amalgamating cities to just make 4 mega cities in the region of Niagara. He was talking about slashing city councils. Ford has gone after school boards, as everybody knows, and he wants trustees to just be capped at 12, and that's not how they've evolved. And he's also appointed these like business people to run certain school boards in the province. And so, the caretaker, I guess, or the custodian of the school board, the Peel District School Board in the Peel region, she like accidentally emailed out the list of names of the people that they were laying off. Oops, to everybody in the board. The NDP in Ontario called for her to be fired. Obviously, important call. But Ford knows that he can get away with this because like there hasn't been a single like office occupation over these decisions, unless I'm wrong. I mean, correct me in the comments if I've missed something. And he's been pushing this so far that now we've arrived with these special economic zones. And these special economic zones allow the province to just say this is going to be exempt from provincial and municipal laws. So what are those laws? Those are labor laws, environmental laws, bylaws, noise bylaws, things that have been zoning, like things that have been set up by the people for a reason. And Ford has just passed this special economic zone bullshit to be like, we're going to declare this a special economic zone. And he talked about trying to do this with the 401. Could you imagine the entire length of the 401 being a special economic zone? How on earth is that possible to tunnel underneath it? I mean, it's crazy. It's obviously not possible. And then he talked about the Ring of Fire, turning the Ring of Fire into a special economic zone. First Nations leadership across Northwestern Ontario were like, absolutely the fuck not, and managed to block that through public pressure. Right, this is what we've got at our disposal right now is campaigns and public pressure. And then he talks about like turning a part of like Southwestern Ontario, like I'm not sure exactly where, I forget. And someone should say in the comments, a dump, trying to build a dump. Um, that will be a special economic zone, which makes a lot of sense. And now he's talking about turning the island airport in Toronto into a special economic zone to force them to build jets. It's like, yeah, that sounds great. Like, why don't you turn an entire airport into a place where no laws, provincial or municipal laws matter? Like, at least the airline industry is regulated by federal laws. But anyway, so this is very, 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 very concerning. Revolutionary Party of Canada, $300,000 consultants. Yeah, and like the trustees have their salaries capped at $12,000, right? So right off the bat, you're not even able to draw from people that have the money or they can afford to actually hold these positions. And then of course there's these bubble protest zones. Oh yeah, Hanlon's Point. I mean, you guys are like Hanlon's Point, Hanlon's Beach. Anything on the island is going to probably be not super fun while they're trying to extend these runways and allow jets to land at the Toronto Island Airport. I mean, there's a reason why people have been fighting for this for like, years and years and years. And I suspect that people will win this as well. I think that this is one of these issues that people will mobilize around more. And I think I saw someone mention Olivia Chow has not used strong mayor powers. I mean, that's fine. And it is good. And she's not the only one. There's other mayors that have refused to use it. The problem is that it's on the books and it isn't about who refuses to use it. It's about who will use it the next time that they have the chance. And it isn't good enough to just be like, well, we'll just elect people that won't use these powers. Cause like we know that's not how it works. And so it is good that Olivia Chow has not done that, although she was on city council forever. So it'd be very weird if she like took a power grab after having spent her entire career at city council, knowing how it operates. So good work, I guess, there. So yeah, and then we got bubble zones. And so certain places are not allowed to be protested. And the criminalization of dissent is just like, crowding us out, crowding us out even more. I talk about all of this in my next book. It's all in there. You're unfortunately not going to see it for a year. The process takes, of course, a year. It has to be edited and then edited and then edited and then find like any of the errors that I may have accidentally added or whatever. But, I think that my biggest concern is that there is no radical and sustained action. I know there's a lot of radical activists doing everything they can. And I know that there's people that are really wanting to fight this stuff back. But the attacks on local democracy in Ontario are astounding. Are astounding. And this hasn't happened in the rest of Canada. Tim Houston was talking, like musing about strong mayor powers to try and stop bike lanes in Halifax. Ultimately that didn't happen. But the fact that like municipalities, local government, local democracy, these things are rooted in Ontario, rooted all across Canada, but they're rooted in Ontario and in 200 years of activism and people fighting to be able to have the right to say what happens in their communities. And yeah, there's NIMBYism And yeah, there's stuff that shouldn't, be a fight at city council, but that is a fight at city council. And sometimes things aren't as efficient, but they're not as efficient as a CEO waving a wand and saying, "Boop, this is what we're going to do all of a sudden," because that is not how a municipal government is supposed to work, right? That is not how it's supposed to work. And these special economic zones, like, it's so crazy that we had these Bill fives, these cascading Bill fives, Ontario, Quebec, and then the federal government Bill C5, that are all trying to clear out things that have been democratically placed for a reason, to say, you know what, noise bylaws, environmental regulation, conservation bylaws, labor laws, none of this matters, because ultimately we have to get what's under the ground out to the market. I mean, we did have that before, like my family came to this country to work in mines like that. And people died in those mines, and people's lives were ruined in those mines, and backs were broken, and children were orphaned. And we people were like, this is bullshit, and we're not going to take that. And through activism and advocacy and fighting, we actually were able to win labor laws and to win conservation laws and to win water protection laws. And I think, like, with the focus on the on international wars, it's going to be very hard for us to cut through this rhetoric and say, sorry, like, you want to talk about global, like, destabilization and security in Canada? That passes through clean water. That passes through secure communities economically that are not reliant on the United States' whims to bomb Iran, and, oh, we can make a sale of arms to the UAE, and, oh, too bad if our weapons end up being used by the Rapid Support Forces. That's just the global arms trade. I mean, this is unacceptable. And I think that a majority of Canadians would probably agree with that. It's just that we've been convinced that the only way to see politics is through the partisan lens. I just had a conversation with Chris Curtis from The Rover, a conversation like this. And he was, trying to find hope at the end of our conversation, because of course it was like not a super hopeful conversation. And it's like there is no hope in a structure like this. And that's not where we should be finding hope, because Mark Carney is gonna plow ahead. He's gonna go as hard as he can and open up economic doors for Canadian military companies as hard as he can. He's gonna tell young Canadians that their future is in a reserve military, so that they can someday go and defend Canada from somebody. I mean, not the United States. We're literally doing war games with the United States right now. It's obviously not the United States. They're gonna defend Canada from Uh, France is not likely gonna attack us. They're pretty close. Denmark is, I guess, the second closest country. Russia, like, really? We're gonna defend like that? That is, it's ridiculous. It's completely nuts. It feels like, in a lot of the stuff that I've been reading from, for these books, for the book that I just finished, comes from the 1960s, where, like, the shadow and the threat of nuclear war is looming over everybody. And it's, like, really charming to see people concerned about, like, global humanity, and, like, nuclear war is bad. And it just feels like, the idea that the nuclear arms race was gonna result in the annihilation of the world was a super real threat in everybody's face. And then, of course, what happens is it's like, well, we'll just pull back, and the threat of nuclear war is going to transform into something else, and we'll find other ways to work with each other, global cooperation and stuff. And now it feels like, the existential threat is, climate change and global warming and these massive wars that we're being told that we personally need to feel like our security is threatened. Like, the security that I might have personally is not threatened in a global sense, like, at all, or anybody watching this. Like, the the security that it should be concerning us the most are children who are sleeping in tents in El Fasher, or in Gaza, or in southern Lebanon, or Beirut, or, you know, Anywhere where families are huddled together and hearing the sound of drones and are afraid for what tomorrow might bring, or anywhere where a mother is clutching her children, listening to bombs dropping and saying to herself, well, at least if it hits us tonight, we're all in the same bed and we will all die. That that is where security is the most important. And it is not the security of someone in Toronto or Montreal or Kamloops or whatever. Like, we have to find ways to resist these narratives from our governments and from mainstream media that keeps, producing these narratives as if they're, like, real and normal and they make sense. And I have faith that we can do it, but it's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough. So yeah, I think I can probably wrap it there unless anyone has any questions or comments. I'm just looking at the chat. I can't show you my setup here, but it's quite hilarious. And there's my light in my room is just like the brightest tube. It's just one long tube, and you can actually see it in my glasses. That's literally my light, just one long tube, and it's kind of perfect for something like this. So thank you to this hotel for having a really perfect setup for me to do this. But it is a dominant narrative, Jen. I mean, like I feel sometimes, not always, I feel crazy that you can, like, just to say the most basic thing, and it's like, "Well, that's not true. What are you against the economy?" It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, we can't pour money. Like, if we poured the money that Carney is pouring into universities and into research and development and into the NRC and bringing back the NRC's commercialization wing, which, existed in World War II, we would launch the next generation of Canadian industry, just like has happened in World War II. We would do that. And it's, like, enraging. Like, this is partly where, my partner is a scientist, and so I see what the scientists are dealing with and the struggles that they're dealing with and how much time and effort it takes to just convince somebody to give them a grant. It's just like, come on. You know, it's it's embarrassing that we've gone back to war, and it will take time for the tide to change on people to realize that. People will realize that. I mean, war isn't at its base popular. And certainly as we see what happens in war, I mean, we have live pictures of ongoing wars. I don't know. I don't know. I think that Carney's meteoric rise is going to be followed by meteoric fall. It's just the question is when and how long is that going to take? Any suggestions for further reading? Whoo. Okay, I'll do a quick reading list of some of the stuff that I've been reading. Um, okay, so all of the stuff on Ford, I have to say, pretty much I'm just relying on the reporting of from places like the Trillium, from Global News. I mean, Isaac Klan and Colin Amello, I mean, have been on this like crazy, and so the folks at the Trillium as well. Um, so the newer stuff, I don't really have a good book or anything to suggest. But I have been reading, The Canadian Identity by W.L. Morton. I really loved. I really loved. Morton was a Red Tory historian. His book came out in 1961, and his book was this book, The Canadian Identity, was on it was a series of lectures that he gave as a professor at the University of Wisconsin. Morton was based in Manitoba, and it's just like a really good window into thinking in the 1960s, 1961, so early in the 1960s. Like, we're not talking about like the George Grant kind of later half of the 1960s. I really liked how he talked about a lot of things, and one of the things I was really, really interested in was he has this like preface to the set of lectures, and in part of the preface, he's like, there's two conditions for the Commonwealth to endure, and I don't remember what the first condition was. It was kind of obvious that like it needs to like endure or whatever. But the second condition, he said, was we need racial equality, which I think, it's kind of interesting to hear people talking about racial equality in the 1960s, and, knowing that back then they also talked about like the English race and the French race. So I don't know how much of that was like English and French racial equality or broader racial equality, but I thought that that was pretty interesting. But that's a really great book that ties together a lot of like where we got here with how we got here with representative democracy, looking at it from the and looking at it really, frankly, after 100 years of Canada's existence and looking forward and saying, what's going to stop us from being absorbed by the United States? That's where Lament for a Nation comes in. Another conservative, George Grant. I like that book a lot because Grant is just such a bitch. He is so bitchy in this book. He hates everybody. He hates the right. He hates the left. And he hates liberals. And you can be reading it and you're like, yeah, 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 yeah. And then he gets like hating the left. And he's like, man, you're such a bitch. It's so hilarious. But it's Lament for a Nation is a classic for a reason. And that's a great book. Another book that I thought was kind of fun to read from that era was The Smug Minority from Pierre Burton. And Burton does not hold back in how much he hates the ruling class. And that's not a Pierre Burton that I know because I'm not like a Canadian literature expert, so haven't read a lot of Burton. But that was also kind of fun to read. Um, this whole book was this whole series was kind of inspired by a book called Take Back the Nation, which Bruce Campbell and Maud Barlow wrote in 1993. And I've had a lot of conversations with Bruce about that book since. And he tells me this great story of like his manuscript was finished. So like, I did this last night and I hit send and it was off to my publisher. And he said that they had to run to the airport to put it on a plane to get it to their publisher, which of course, that's life in Canada would have been back then. So Take Back the Nation is a really interesting book because some of their fears are unfounded. Like they really believe that Canada's like sovereignty was threatened from abroad, especially from the United States. And I think that, reading Take Back the Nation for me, I realized just how much like it was coming from inside the house, that it was the Canadian elites that were really pushing for neoliberal reforms that end up hollowing everything out. So that's a really good book. I have read, oh my God, like I feel like I've just read 100 books. I've read a lot of another Tory. I'm reading a lot of Tories, I guess. It was nice. Imagine Tories actually writing something that's not insane. It's been a long time. Jeffrey Simpson's The Friendly Dictator. That's his book about Jean Chrétien's really centralizing power within the prime minister's office. It's a fun read. It's an easy read. Again, he's a conservative, so like there's parts of it where you're like, okay, buddy, whatever. But it really does help to like name. I think he wrote in 2005. Really name a transformative time in Canadian politics that then and then he kind of sets it up with like, well, this is what happens. This is what's going to have to happen for the Conservatives to win the next time they win, and effectively it was uniting, which of course is what happened. And then I love Peter Seaman, Peter Seaman. I mean, like just the master of political writing in Canada. And I read the Canadian Revolution for this book. I've read other ones of his books, and Newman is fun because he's so into that political world, and that he just has story after story. Like there's a lot of tangents in what he writes. Um, and he one of like my favorite things that Newman talks about is like uh talking about a man who's a careful the careful type of man who wears both suspenders and a belt. I quote him in this next coming book about how Canadians are the ones who walk into a room and rush to the most uncomfortable chair, and not out of any kind of like, we're so good or humility kind of position, but just like that's what we deserve is the uncomfortable chair. So yeah, so that's a great book. Steve, you got a copy of that book. It's a brick. So that's fun. I have Double Vision as well, which I've read before, which is it Anthony Wilson Smith and Greenspan? That's a guess. Oh my God. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? That's a good book as well. It's kind of a classic for the Chrétien era. I have Stephen Maher's book, The Prince, which I haven't read yet. I promise you, Stephen, I will review it, even though it feels kind of silly to review something I'm Trudeau now. But no, of course, these books exist forever. I didn't get what I was looking at of that book, which was an explanation of the reliance on consultants under Trudeau, which of course is research that I've got from Head to Canada. And I see Cecil Rosner joined. If you're still here, got your organization's name, which I always screw up because the International Journalist Foundation, the Investigative Journalism Foundation's work on freedom of information is in that book as well. I think that's a pretty good little like start of a reading list. The Life and Times of William Lyon Mackenzie King by Charles Conrad or something. I don't remember. It's written in 18 It doesn't matter. It's a book from the 1800s. That's a great book. The Life and Times of Mackenzie King is a great book, and I've read both volumes, and I love it. And I also just started reading, I was reading pieces of it, 2 very, very old books, one on the history of the separate school system in Ontario, the Catholic system, which, of course, at a time where the entire province or colony was run by Anglicans is kind of interesting. And also, a set of, a book which is mostly speeches from Lord Dufferin. And that's interesting because Lord Dufferin is seen as this flamboyant kind of um, statesman who's different than all of the previous colonial heads that Canada has. He comes in like 1870 or whatever. And in this book, I found a little heart that someone had written to someone in it, cut out from like I don't even know. The writing suggests that it's from like 1910 or something, or maybe even earlier. So that was really fun to read. Um, I relied a lot on, Stanley Ryerson, classic, necessary. If you're interested in the history of Canada, you gotta read Ryerson. Ryerson University should have been changed to Stanley Ryerson, who's, of course, was, Egerton Ryerson's, grandson. Um, Also, notable socialist historian and excellent, excellent, excellent. I read Tim Buck's book on, communism. I forget what it's called. It might just be like communism in Canada or on communism. Um, it's a great one as well, Timba. Oh my God, now you're really testing me. Anyway, I could go on. I could go on. But I don't see any other questions, or although I don't see anyone telling me to stop. Oh, he did it his historiography on SL Louis Rail. That's very cool, Steve. Um, yeah, I read a lot of, stuff. I read Jean Taillet's, The Northwest is Our Mother. That's a really important book. And I also read, G.F. Stanley's, the Northwest Rebellion, which is very, very, very good and important, and but a right like a a white kind of old history man, kind of 19 whatever year that was written in 1960 something on the rebellions in Red River and in the Northwest. Really, really good. You know what? I'll end with that. I think that one of the most important things about this book for me, writing this book, was to really appreciate how the Métis nation at Red River really understood that they had to be democratically organized. And it was in that democratic organization that they saw that they would have power, bargaining power, most importantly with Canada. And I think that that for me was really important to see because this here is a truly made in Canada experiment with democracy, influenced by tons of different people all around them, influenced by the French, by the indigenous nations around them as well. And they established provisional governments to be able to negotiate their entry into Confederation and to demand rights, to demand access to power. And I had just never really thought about the rebellions as being, really deep acts of democracy, and really deep examples of made in Canada democracy and made in Canada opposition to democracy, especially with the Canada First movement. But for me, I think that was the most exciting. So I'll leave you with that. It's been about 30 minutes. Thank you all for your support, and I will be back to writing on Substack now that this book is put to bed. I don't have to look at it for a couple of months. But everything that you have sent my way, whether it's words or money or sharing links or whatever, I super, super appreciate it. And thank you so much. And if we ever cross paths, make sure you come up and say hi, and we'll hang out for a bit. So, hi.